All right. Welcome back to the channel. My name's Big John. Proud you be with us. Hope everything's going well for you. Still doing your dry fire. Still doing your PT. Getting you everything squared away. Yes. Nod your bony head. Yes. Uh, that's what we try and do here. Uh, you had your homework. So you've determined a primary, an alternate, a contingency, an emergency location if you have to bug out. Now, ideally, we would not have to bug out. Ideally, we'd be able to just quote unquote bug in. That's where our supplies are. That's where we know the area. We're known to other people, our friends, family, etc. are there. But that does not rule out the fact that there may be a certain situation where we did have to leave, whether it was a chemical spill, wildfire, whatever. If you lived on the coast, you may have a hurricane coming in, and the discretion being the better part of valor, it might be best just let's head inland and, stay at Holiday Inn for a couple of days, they got a free breakfast and an indoor swimming pool, and we watch cable TV or whatever. So what I want you to do now on your next homework is I want you to implement. Now, I'm not talking about driving halfway across the country, but what I want you to do is have a primary, an alternate, a contingency, an emergency route that, the primary may be interstate, alternate, you may be running back roads a little bit, or not necessarily the back roads, but like instead of 2059, you may be going up Highway 11 or something. Sorry about that. I got a little bit of sore throat. Contingency, you may be running county roads. Emergency, as the old man said, you may be riding Shanksmire, you may be walking. But pick one of them. Preferably your alternative, not your primary. And let's do a couple of vehicles and let's have a rally point. So we're going to meet at a specific location at a specific time window. And let's assume we don't have cell phone coverage. Cell towers are down. And if you want it to really be fun, let's have a mechanical issue, hypothetically, where if somebody doesn't make the rally point at a specific time, you know where they're coming from, and then you're able to go down and meet up with them, that sort of thing, if that's clear as mud. So let's take a route. Let's have a rally point where we meet up, at least two vehicles, more the merrier. One vehicle is going to have mechanical trouble and not be able to get to the rally point. And so then how do we locate them without communications and then continue on? Now, once you rally with them, you can pretend that or quit pretending that you got mechanical trouble and just go on. Don't leave your vehicle sitting on the side of the road somewhere. But you'll be surprised what you'll learn on doing stuff like that. That even simple things all of a sudden aren't simple anymore. And if you really want to have fun, do it after dark. But so that's our homework for the next time. So what we're going to talk about today is manhood. We talked last week on the last video, we started discussing our tribe. And when you looked at the chief or the king, originally they were not, it wasn't a bloodline. We have King Charles in Great Britain now, and he's King Charles because his mom, who passed away, was Queen Elizabeth II. It was a hereditary thing. Well, we're not looking at that. In the old days, the chief of the band or tribe or the king was the best man. And if all of a sudden he lost his mental acuity, his physical ability, somebody else could challenge him and take over that office, so to speak. It was not a hereditary for life kind of thing. Sometimes I think we could do well to emulate that a little more, But we hear a lot about, when we talk about manhood, we hear a lot about the idea of toxic masculinity recently. And I'll be honest, that aggravates the steer out of me. That because a man acts as a man and he doesn't act like a wishy-washy whatever, he's toxic and he's the problem of every ill in the world. But I got to thinking about it, and I thought, what does the Bible say about manhood? What does it mean to be a man? You know. Now, when I was young and growing up in the early 70s, I had examples. I had my father, I had my grandfathers, I had the elders of the men of the church, the deacons, the pastors, men in the community that lived before me in a way that I could emulate. This is what it meant to be a man. Nowadays, a lot of young men don't have that. They have no father figures, and they don't have good examples of what it means to be a man. And so when we look at not just what do we think it means to be a man, but more importantly, what does God say it means to be a man? So I looked up the definition of toxic masculinity, and it says it's the dominant form of masculinity wherein men use dominance, violence, and control to assert their power and superiority. Now, first off, I don't believe it's the dominant form of masculinity. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't exist. Yes, there are men, and I'm using that term loosely, that use dominance and violence and control. We see it frequently. Women are physically, verbally, emotionally abused. Their children are physically, emotionally, and verbally abused. Now, the male that does that is not a man. He's less than a man. Fact of the matter is, in my opinion, he's a step below an animal, because an animal a lot of times won't do what they do. But I don't believe it's the dominant form of masculinity, nor do I believe it's as common as society dictates. But what does God say? Who do we look to? Are you going to look to a pro athlete, a member of media, or a content creator? Are they a good example? Some are. Some ain't. You say, well, I don't have any sons. You have daughters. What should they look for in a spouse? What should they be able to expect from a man when they stand before the congregation and say, I do? Do they have a reasonable expectation? I think so. I'll prefer my daughter to marry somebody that I'm not going to have to kill later, But do they know what to look for? Are they looking at the physical appearance, or do they look past? The old joke coming up was, it don't matter what you look, it's what you got under the hood. Your car could look sharp as a tack, but if it couldn't get out of its own way, it wasn't much. But you had some of them old cars that looked like they was held together with baling wire, but they'd stomp the ground when you romped on the gas, So is there something besides physical appearance that we need to be thinking about? Well, I think so. I think we need to look at what's under the hood. When we looked at our mission statement, why do we do what we do? What's the mission statement? To be a man. What does God expect of us? Well, there are several verses. And being a good Baptist, I alliterated them. I never found out S's for all these, but we finally got S's. But what's the general mission statement for a Christian man? First, he should submit. He must be submitted to God. Micah 6, verse 8. He hath showed thee, O man, what is good, and what doth the Lord require of thee, but to do justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with thy God. Now, that's written in the form of a question, but I believe it's a rhetorical question. This is what God expects of us as a man: to live justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly. when we think about this, uh, when we look at Ecclesiastes, the last chapter at the very end, it says, we get to the conclusion of the matter, to obey God, to fear Him, and keep His commandments. For this is the whole duty of man. Now, when you look at that in the King James, duty is in italics. And the translators put it there because that word duty was not in the original text. They added that word to make the thought flow, to make it a little easier to read. So really we should read it, it's the whole of man, to fear God, to obey God, and to keep His commandments. But I don't mind the word duty being there. Robert E. Lee said that duty is the most sublime word in the English language. We can never do more, and we should never wish to do less. Everything we do as far as duty to God is not done as a basis of fear. And we can't do enough because of what God has done for us. 1 John says, that we love Him because He first loved us. That's the idea. We're submitting to God. And if we can't submit to God, nothing else amounts to hill of beans. Everything else is academic. But to walk humbly, don't get too high on yourself. There's a lot of men in life, in history, that are examples. Adam was created in the image of God. He was created perfect. But he fell. He failed. He sinned. Noah said by faith, he built the ark. For this, was it Hebrews 11, for the saving of his family? I forget exactly. It's Hebrews chapter 11, the chapter of the heroes of faith. But after that, he got out and got drunk. He planted a vineyard and got drunk. Moses, who led the children of Israel out of bondage out of Egypt, killed a man out of anger. He struck the rock the first time as God had told him to get water. But the second time he struck the rock, God told him to speak to the rock. But he was aggravated at the Israelites. He was mad, and he struck it. Now that rock, I believe, was the top of Christ. Christ was struck the first time when he went to the cross. You don't strike him a second time. You speak to him. And because of that, he didn't go into the promised land. He got to see it, but he didn't set foot in it. David, the Bible says David was a man after God's own heart. He committed adultery. He had a man killed. He had Uriah killed to hide his sin with Bathsheba. Don't get too full up with yourself. It's walk humbly. We're to submit. We're to support. 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 8. But if any provide not for his own, and specifically for those of his own house, he hath denied the faith, and he is worse than an infidel. That's strong language. We're to provide for our family. And I don't believe that's our immediate family. I believe that's our extended family, and I especially believe that this is also referring to our church family. That we're to meet their needs, their spiritual needs, their physical needs, their emotional needs. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, got the pyramid. The first base, bottom, shelter, food, water. But that's just the starting point. We go on up to self-actualization. We're to provide for our families. We're to sanctify. We're called to be leaders of the house. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 22, one of all men's favorite verses is, wives, submit yourselves unto your husbands as unto the Lord. But you drop down a couple verses in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 25 says, husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it, that he might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of water by the word. Now, man, if we love our wife the way Christ loved the church, she'll have no problem at all submitting to us. This is not to be a tyrant or a dictator. but to lead in love, that we can present her holy, spotless, and acceptable to God. Just like Christ, sometime, hopefully in the near future, will present his bride, the church, to his Father, spotless and whole. We should be able to present our family, our wife. We've got a duty to our children. In Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 6 through 9, and I didn't write it down, but it talks about educating our children. When you rise up, when you sit down, when you're walking in the way, when you lay down, you instruct them. You teach them who God is, what God's done for us. Now, they're specifically talking about when you go into the promised land, you don't forget what God did for you, bringing you out of bondage out of Egypt, where you were slaves, and brought you into a land, and you're living in houses you didn't build, and you're eating on orchards you didn't plant, and you're getting grapes off vines you didn't set. When your children come to you and say, Daddy, why we got to get up on Sunday morning and go to church? Sunday night, Wednesday night. You be able to look them in the eye and say, baby, your daddy was in bondage at one time. He was in bondage to sin. But just like how God brought the children of Israel out of bondage into the promised land, God's doing the same thing to your daddy. I've still got the flesh. I've got two natures. I've still got the Adamic nature. But I'm a new creature. Paul talked about in Corinthians, we groan, wanting to put off the old. Sanctify. Lead your children. Lead your wife. Okay. What should the characteristics be for a man? First off, he should be submitted again. Submitted to God. Micah chapter 6, verse 8. It ain't changed. Is God is the head of man, and Christ is the head of the church. We're the head of the house, but God's the head of us. And always remember that authority is not there to give you dictator power, but it holds you accountable. That is the main thing. You're held accountable, not them. They're not going to ask Melinda about the house. God's going to ask me. He ain't going to ask her. He ain't going to ask Virginia. He's going to ask me. Now again, when we look at our family, let's don't think just of our immediate nucleus family, although that's what it's directed at. But let's apply it to our extended family, our church family. Do we show leadership to them as well? Young Christians, if we bring them under our wings and disciple them. I think this is one of the greatest failings of the church. We evangelize, but we don't disciple. Now, I don't mean disciple as far as discipline, although sometimes that is necessary, but disciple in the idea of instruct them what it means to be a Christian and to help them grow. We should be steadfast, faithful. 1 Corinthians 15, verse, can you read me writing? Verse 58 says, Therefore, my beloved brethren, be ye steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, for as much as ye know that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. As my pastor, Brother Terry, says, he says, I can't do much, but I can be faithful. That's what God's calling us to be. Be faithful. Be consistent. Be steadfast. We're to strive. We're to labor. That's what it just said. Our labor is not in vain if we remember these things. We ain't saved to sit on our butt and enjoy the blessings of God and not do anything else. We're to be stout-hearted. I never found an S for courage. Deuteronomy 31, verse 6, Be ye strong and of good courage. Fear not, nor be afraid of them. For the Lord thy God, he is that doth go with thee. He will not fail thee nor forsake thee. Now that right there ought to make it, as Brother Terry says, that'd make a Baptist shout. He's with us. He will not forsake us. We don't walk alone. We're to be subject. We're to be accountable to each other. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 5. Likewise, ye younger, submit yourselves unto the elder. Yea, all of ye be subject one to another, and be clothed, and here it is again, with humility. For God resisteth the proud, and giveth grace to the humble. Be humble. Y'all have heard me talk about a pastor friend of mine that holds me accountable. Most every time I see him, what you studying? He holds me accountable. And rightfully so. Y'all should hold me accountable. And we should hold each other accountable. We're to be seasoned, mature. 1 Corinthians chapter 13 is called the chapter of love. And it's the word was translated charity into the King James, but it could also be translated as love. And for sake of time, because I'm getting long-winded, I'm not going to read, but starting in verse 4, going down to verse 8, it talks about what charity does and does not do. But for our idea, is chapter 13, verse 11. It says, when I was a child, I spake as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. Lack of love is a lack of maturity. Now, I'm not talking about this butterflies in your stomach, when you're dating your spouse, Ain't nothing wrong with that. But this is a mature love. This is something as we grow. In verse 7, it says that charity beareth all things. Now, charity's not there, but that's what it's referring to. So we're going to add it. We're going to put it in italics. But charity or love beareth all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things. It says charity never faileth. But whether they be prophecies, they shall fail. Whether they be tongues, they shall cease. Whether there be knowledge, it shall vanish away. But love won't. And we should be mature in our love. Now, how does this apply? We've talked about it before. If your family breaks the glass in case of emergency, what are they going to get? A mature, strong, steadfast, stout-hearted, biblical man, or a reprobate. And so, well, what if I don't have a family? Who do I protect, provide for, disciple? You got a church family. Like we said before, you've heard me talk about blood thicker than water, the blood of the oath, that Christ's blood binds us. It binds us in a way that's not even with our own families. And leadership. You don't get to choose whether or not you're a leader. You are a leader. What you choose is whether or not you're a good leader or a bad leader. You're a leader regardless. And if your family follows your leadership, where are they going to end up? So, that's about all I got. I appreciate you putting up with us. You know what I'm going to say. Comments, questions, criticism, witticism, put them in the comment box. I can help you any way you let me know. As always, I remain your humble and obedient servant, John Alsabrook.